Well, welcome back to A Beautiful Church podcast, everyone. I am your host, Adam Whitescarver. I am here with another local nonprofit leader who is doing awesome work in the city of Chattanooga. And so I want to introduce my friend, Jonathan Ingram. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be a ton of fun, I think.
It is going to be fun. I do need to say from the onset of this interview that Jonathan Ingram, he's been my friend. How many years have we known each other now?
6 or 7, I think, at this point.
Yes, so 6 or 7 years, and I would say 5. Was it 5 of those years? I was mispronouncing his name. And he was kind of polite. He would just kind of tell me the proper pronunciation when he'd see me, but he'd never just stop me and say, "You're saying it wrong." But just because I love you, listener, more than Jonathan was willing to get in my face at the time, it's Jonathan Ingram, but it's misspelled horribly. It's spelled Ingraham. No, it's not really misspelled. It's just the English.
It's the proper spelling,
Yeah.
and I think you're probably the person that has the hardest time with it.
I do.
Out of anyone I've ever met.
When I was in first grade, I had an excellent phonics teacher that drilled that stuff into my head, and so I can't get over it. But I am working on it. But it's
grace upon grace.
Like Gloucester in England is Gloucestershire or something like that, and
something like
Worcestershire is Worcester. Yeah,
something like that.
It's the same kind of thought. So he's just got some British pedigree here.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Jonathan is with a ministry called Faith Co-op, which has been rebranded from
Chattanooga Faith Work Culture.
And I feel like that's worth saying because you might have heard of that. It's a fairly. How long has it been that you've been in this rebrand?
We've been in the rebrand since August of 2023.
Right. So we're still within the same range of where I feel like you still need to say that.
Yeah,
even by
absolutely.
the time this episode releases. So
absolutely.
Before we get into all the stuff that you do with your ministry, tell us who Jonathan Ingram is.
Yeah. Well, I am from Melbourne, Florida, not a local Chattanoogan. I ended up in Chattanooga because of Covenant College. That's where I did my undergrad. I'm also a husband to my wife who I met at Covenant College, Erin. We have 5 children, so I'm also a father. Rayleigh is 10 and Penny is 8. Kellen is 6. And then we have 2-year-old twins, Hunter and Amos.
That was fun news when you announced that to everybody.
That was fun news. I'm still getting used to having twins.
Yes.
It's a big journey, but we're so thankful for them. They are massive gifts. And I'm a big sports guy, so I love, we're recording this right in the middle of end of March Madness, and that's been a ton of fun. I played soccer in college, though, and so anything sports is something I enjoy. But we love living in Chattanooga. Even though I'm not from here, it feels like it's become home. All the kids were born here. Right. I don't know where we would go. This is where we want to be.
Right. Very cool. Well, so give me a little bit of your vocational journey. How did you get to where you are? Where have you been, and how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one of the things I've learned, and I get to share a lot about is how oftentimes vocational journeys are not what you plan.
No,
I think when we're 22, we oftentimes think a vocational journey is like getting on an escalator and you just ride it to the top. But as my friend Michaela O'Donnell says, she says it's more like getting on the Coe River and going down on a whitewater rafting trip where you may or may not even end up in the boat.
Yes, and almost like there should also be tributaries that you didn't know were on that
100%.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and then shore lunches.
That's right.
Yes.
All kinds of things. So my undergrad degree was in theology, and when I started it, I really thought I was going to end up being a pastor. And I always joke with folks that the reason that didn't happen was because I almost failed Dr. McDougall's Greek class at Covenant College. And that's partly is true, but began to realize I didn't know if I was feeling that call to go to full-time ministry, but wasn't sure what that meant. So I picked up an education minor just to be marketable as a Bible teacher. And so that was my first job, was a Bible teacher. My wife and I then moved to Virginia to be near her family, and I worked in a boarding school for kids with social and emotional disorders, and learned a ton about myself. But during that time, I knew that was never going to be the long-term thing. But I learned what I did want to do was work with people outside the classroom, but still in an educational experience. And the way I thought best that would happen is on a college campus. And so I went to a small school up in Western Pennsylvania called Geneva College. I got my master's in college administration so that I could work on college campus. And that's what led us back to Covenant in Chattanooga. Is for 4 years I worked at Covenant as the associate dean of students, working with students on campus and leadership and kind of managing everything that happened in the residence life experience at the college. And that was kind of my journey back to Chattanooga. And on that journey, though, I realized I really enjoyed one-on-one interaction with people, interacting with their stories and helping them think about what next steps would be, especially people who were just graduating college, which the Lord opened the door for me to leave Covenant and to begin work with the Chattanooga Fellows Program. And that was kind of my entryway into what we'll talk more about with all the work that we do now. But the Chattanooga Fellows Program is one of the things that we have in our umbrella of Faith Co-op, where we're helping recent college graduates figure out what it means to follow Jesus in all of life, specifically as a worker. And most of the people that go through that program aren't looking to be a full-time pastor. They're going to work in industries all over the city and in different professions, and we want to help them have an imagination to see how God cares about it and what it means to serve Him in that work. And so that's been a really fun journey to get to a place where going from thinking I was going to be a pastor to getting all these other experiences and realizing how God's wired me towards experiential education, and then having a chance to help people have light bulbs go off in their life in these really practical ways. And
you really do kind of pastor them through that. And I do need to just say about the fellows, I mean, you guys somehow year after year recruit an awesome group of young people that are way fun, way passionate, and also a good mix of like, boy, this person's far along and this person needs a lot more help. And you just invest in them. And whenever they've come here, they've always, I mean, it's just a blast working with them. I mean, hats off to you for having that program here and just seeing the success of it. That's probably my, if I'm picking one, it's one of my favorite things that you guys do. But
it's an honor to get to do it, and it really is a chance to work with really motivated folks that are trying to follow Jesus in their life, and so they're earnestly trying to understand what that means, and how to see Him on a Monday, how to see Him on a day when you're sitting in traffic or when you're at a job that's really hard, and what does it mean to honor God in those moments that we oftentimes overlook. And it's really fun to see them get a vision for that in their own lives. Yeah,
and so you were at Covenant, and then you transitioned into the Fellows, which, were they connected with Covenant at the beginning?
No, the program was actually started, the Chattanooga Fellows Program was actually started at North Shore Fellowship in partnership with a few other PCA churches in town. And that's where it was housed. And so when I took over the program, I was leaving a role at Covenant to do that and working with different churches in town to put that program on.
Okay, and so when you started that kind of began your ministry's life, and your life started having parallels. So speak into where these parallels have taken you in the past few years.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the Chattanooga Fellows every week meet with 5 to 6 different people in town and hear about vocational stories and stories of following Jesus. And so what that meant was I was meeting lots and lots of people in town. And a couple of things would happen after someone would come and talk to the fellows and share their story is, one, they would say, man, I wish I had done something like this when I was 22 years old. And heck, I'm still asking questions about what it means to follow God and the work I'm doing today. And I started realizing that this network I was building, they weren't just experts, but they were also seekers, just like I was. I was feeling that in my own heart as well. And along that journey, I met Clark Taylor, who was a retired hospital administrator, and Bill Stiles, who still works in marketing. And they're two guys that are a little farther along in life than I am. And in the season they were in, were really wrestling with this question as well. And they had started something called the Chattanooga Institute for Faith and Work. And we're doing different ministry things around connecting faith and work for business leaders in town. And as we got to know each other more and more, we started doing things together where the younger fellows and some of the people they were working with were having events together. And what we saw in the audience, where you had people 22 years old and people 45 years old who were thinking about the same things and seeing the synergy in the room and the excitement, said, man, how cool would it be to build a community of people that are thinking like this, that are wrestling with this, and that can be encouragements to one another for the sake of the city in light of the gospel. And led us to right before COVID in the late 2019, thinking about what it would look like to join forces. I'm so thankful for those men and their impact on my life and on the city. And that is when, right as COVID was hitting, I took over as executive director of what we were then calling Chattanooga Faith Work Culture, to run a lot of different distinct initiatives, similar to Chat Hop in some ways, that met different demographics of the city with similar visions and missions, and then building in intentional ways for those communities to know one another, to build out what I would say a culture of what it means to follow Jesus in all of life. I think one of the biggest ways we build culture is through a shared lexicon, and what we desire to do in these different programs is create language that can be shared no matter what you're doing for work or your age group or your denomination, that can unite the body of Christ for the sake of the city. And that's what we get to do now. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. So when you've so tell me about the rebrand. Actually, let's go into that. Why did we do a rebrand? Just because I feel like that's good for everyone to know. And how did you get there?
Yeah, you asked me what the old name was, and even when it was Chattanooga Faith Work Culture, it was a hard name for people to remember.
Right.
And so I have lots of stories about all the things the organization was called. But at that point, when we did the rebrand back as we started working on it in early 2023, we were a couple years into programming in the city, and I'd seen a lot of what we were doing grow. And we were slowing down to think about, if we were going to do a rebrand, we wanted to do a full, who are we and what are we about? And so before we got to a name, we wanted to say, what has God led us into here with these different programs and the impact we have, the potential to have on the city? And one of the things we realized was how powerful stories were. And what had happened was the majority of what we do, if you come to, I'm sure we'll talk about the different aspects of our organization here, but one of the things we do are lunch and learn events. If you were to come to a lunch and learn event, it's 35-minute content, and instead of it being principles, they were really story-based, where you would hear another professional in town share about what the gospel meant for them in their work. And even if you weren't in the same field they were, you're sitting there, and what you just naturally do is contextualize it to the work that you have. Okay, if this person is thinking about faithfulness in this way, what does that mean for the work that I'm called to do? And so we started realizing we weren't an institute. We were training people's minds at some level, but the main thing we were doing was giving people eyes to see how God was moving and working already in the city, and inviting them to imagine what it meant for them to join him in the work he's already doing all around us all the time. We have a God who is bringing the redemption of the world himself. He's a working God. And part of the way, though, he chooses to commune with us is through us joining him in that work. And that's what we want to try to help people do. And so we really thought about our mission statement a lot, and we said, what are we? And we said, well, we're helping awaken Christians to how their faith brings daily purpose. On those days between the Sundays, what does it mean to honor and glorify God? And we said, how are we doing this? Well, we're doing this with lots of different initiatives under one umbrella, and said, well, we'll be the Faith Cooperative. But as we were talking, we just kept shortening it to Faith Co-op. I was like, well, let's just go with Faith Co-op. We were trying to get people to actually remember our name. And so let's go with that. And it speaks to who we are, and what we want to build in the city is become a hub for these types of conversations, for people to know where there's resources at, and also other people to be encouraged by in the work that they're doing. Yeah.
So just two reflections before we move on and even talk about the specific programs. The first just being, you do a lot for these, the fellows seeking, where am I on my vocational journey, and what am I supposed to be doing? And I think we just sort of miss that when you go to work somewhere, there is a spiritual journey that you have to take, especially if you want to keep growing in integrity as those pressures or different things keep coming. And I have found whenever I speak into the lives of younger people that just by having to revisit these themes that I haven't thought about, or those challenges that I faced, they remind me of things that I've been through. And so it's always like I come away going, oh, I never thought about that in my own life because of something that was happening. I contextualize it to myself. And then, the other thing of finding purpose, which I think, these aren't mutually exclusive ideas of, having this journey as you're young and as you get older, finding your purpose. But there's just way too many people, I think, that are in, marketplace situations where, and look, I'm bivocational. I work as a pastor too, where we forget to talk to sort of just, I don't know, the word that's coming to my head, and this might be terrible, is impregnate with meaning secular work, so to speak. There's talk about, and I actually think there's talk about so much meaning and purpose when you're doing vocational ministry, under a steeple or at a church, but we neglect to talk about how the kingdom of God it's a kingdom. It's not just the religious side of things. It's the seemingly non-religious and finding the meaning there. And I just wonder, like, how many more people would do their job better, more joyfully, with more longevity, with more integrity, if they saw that as an aspect of their worship.
That's right.
I'm speaking to the choir here.
Yeah, one of the talks I do as an entryway into the faith and work conversations, I talk about the narratives that are hitting us all the time about what work is supposed to mean. So we have all these narratives from the world that it's how our identity is found, it's so I can get rich, it's so that I work so that one day I don't have to work. And those are always really easy for people to pick out. But what I always have them do as well is say, what are the implicit narratives that we pick up in our Christian communities about work that doesn't happen in a church? And, I think a couple of those are, one is we think that if we don't work in a church or we don't work as a missionary, our job really, then the reason our work matters is we can make money and pay the professional Christians, so to tithe.
Right.
Or we think
you're somehow some kind of second class.
Yes.
Or you're only good for your money, which is the worst possible message that the church could send.
Or you're doing purposeful work at your job if you're able to evangelize.
Right.
So if I can share my faith, that's the only way that I can do meaningful kingdom work, is by sharing about Jesus. And I'm not saying that's not a good way to do it,
right?
But we narrow it down to these types of things.
It's too reductionist.
And the big phrase that we use a lot is that we live in our Christian culture with what we call the false sacred secular divide, that we have the parts of our life that God really cares about and where we meet God, and then we have the parts of our life that we're just surviving that maybe just are going to burn up one day and they don't really matter anyway. And so when we do that, we think that going to church is where we meet God, and maybe in our quiet time and maybe a small group, and everything else is something that we now have God filled up in us so we can go survive. And to get back to the really spiritual things. But what I really believe Scripture tells us is that God goes before us, and He is everywhere. That He is there in your work, and He's present. And it's not about you being filled up with God and bringing Him to work, but that He's there already working. It's how do we as believers posture ourselves in a way where we see that we see what we're doing as us joining with God in the good work that He is already doing, that He's actually one fulfilling anyway, that frees us to do this as a gift, as a way to commune with the Father, instead of something we're earning or a way that we're bringing God, and it's up to us to bring Him places, but that we get to join Him where He's already at.
Yeah, I can't, some of those narratives you spoke there, gosh, I can't imagine just working my whole life. So I've got more stuff. And then once you get more stuff, then you realize, like, how empty is this that I have a lot of stuff now? Like, if you actually succeed to get all the stuff you ever wanted, it's a pretty, like, rotten, empty reward, kind of in the end. I mean, yes, it's nice to have things, but if that's what you're living for and moving for, that, that's just going to be a bitter thing. And if you never get to that level of, where you're making that much money in order to have all this stuff, you're just embittered and thinking, I haven't, arrived, kind of a thing. If you stay with those narratives and you don't move past those and grow, and different people are in different places, and obviously the pressures of the workplace are going to push people to ask questions about the narratives that they have had. I mean, I've met the wealthy people that have said, I had everything I ever wanted, but then I realized I'm missing something still. And then the people that, I got broken by, I was working a meaningful job, but I was never making much money. And so that I was feeling like I was a failure, and somehow, yeah. All right. So, we'll keep bringing this stuff up, but let's talk about the specific ways in which you get across these messages. What are some of the programs, activities you do? Yeah.
So, We've already talked about the Chattanooga Fellows Program, and that's a program that we recruit people from outside of Chattanooga to come live here. They live with a host family while they're in town. We help them find a part-time job in an industry they want to pursue.
Can I do a timeout real fast? Always recruiting from outside of Chattanooga? If you're from Chattanooga, you're disqualified?
No.
Okay.
But we do want to make sure that this is why you want to stay in Chattanooga. So if you went to UTC or Covenant, we will ask you about, is this what you actually want to do, or is this just the way I stay in town? the goal is to build out part of it is learning what it means to build community post-college. And, when you're no longer living in a dorm and can go to Taco Bell at 2 a.m. with your neighbors, what does it mean to actually build community when you have to really intentionally seek it out? So they're living in community with other families. They're getting to know a new group of people, their age group. They're working in a job that they might want to pursue long-term. And they're learning about what God says about their life and how the gospel story is something they get to live into. And they're getting to know about Chattanooga. So every week that group of folks we work with gets to meet with nonprofit organizations in town. So they'll meet with 25 nonprofit organizations over the course of the year and learn about the needs in the city, how they overlap, what it looks like to enter those needs, to see what kind of pricked in their own heart about what they want to keep pursuing, whether in a job or in a service opportunity. And they get to learn about who they are and who God wired them to be. So that's one of our programs. We have a program called the Main and Market Fellows, which is for a 9-month program as well, but for established professionals in town, people who are already working in industry jobs all over the city that meet every Monday night for 9 months and do a deep dive into the gospel story, contextualize that gospel story to our city and the moment we find ourselves now here in Chattanooga, and then contextualize it to the job that they have. What's it mean for gospel renewal to show up into their own work? And so we run that with folks all over town. So we have 11. I was
going to say, you got some heavyweights that come in for that one.
We
do.
Sure. I'm really thankful for the folks that have been involved with that. And we have 11 participants in that program right now from 8 different churches, 9 different organizations, different companies in town that have people going through that. And we run that every year. We have... That's so good for a city to have that. Good job. It's been really neat. And seeing even, I talked about light bulbs with 22-year-olds, but seeing folks a little farther along in their career have epiphanies about the gospel that they've never thought about before, that informs the work that they're doing. We also run a faith-driven network, so where we work with entrepreneurs and investors. So a few times a year, we run 6-week cohorts that go through a short study over a lunch hour for entrepreneurs, and then one for investors, and then quarterly have networking events for anyone that would put themselves in one of those categories to come together, meet other people that are on that grind or thinking about investing, and get to hear a story from a local entrepreneur about the journey they're on and how their faith informs it. We have a class that we'll do in churches or in businesses called Faith and Work 101. It's 6 sessions where we'll come in and do a brief primer of what the Bible says about your work. And hopefully,
is this Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings either?
Yeah, we've done Wednesday nights. We've done Sunday mornings. We've done Sunday nights. We've come in for a day and a half at a business. So we're willing to work with people on that. We have a Lunch and Learn series that happens every other month. By the time this comes out, we'll be in the middle of our next Lunch and Learn series, which will be on wisdom in the workplace and having people come in and just share what does it look like to be wise leader and where God's called you to work and the vocations that you have in your life. And so we'll be in the middle of having events for anyone in the city to come to. We put those on at different locations around town. And it's a way just to come together, meet people, and get to be challenged in something in a really short talk that you get to participate in. What else? What am I missing? Well, we'll also, by this point that this comes out, we'll have a podcast, our own podcast going called Weekday Saints. And our goal in that podcast is to tell stories of people who are doing work every week that people might not see with their eyes, that people need to know about, and see how God is showing up, not just in CEOs' lives or in leaders of companies, but in people who are being faithful in the work they've been called to do, whether it's in the manufacturing space or running a lawn service or being a barber, that the Lord shows up there and that they can be faithful there. And so we're excited to be able to tell those stories, to encourage people that are in those spaces, and to give others who maybe haven't thought about that eyes to see those people as doing work that God cares about and it matters to him as well.
Yeah, so I just want to speak to that. I love the faith and work combination in ministry. There's really could you call it a movement? Do you guys call it a movement within your circle? Or
it's a debate, yeah.
Okay, I don't like using the term movement that much either. It's just kind of a weird term, but whatever it is, this big ministry that's all over at least the U.S. of this faith and work. So much of it, and I'm grateful that this is happening, but a lot of it's with the higher executives, and that needs to happen. I am so grateful for everyone I know. I have friends in that ministry. I have that are the business leaders as well as the people who lead those business leaders. Amazing work, but but I don't hear enough of what you just talked about as far as, these are the people that are on this ground level, and they're doing stuff that unless you're, really seeking them out, you're not going to hear those stories of deep meaning in places like, this is my very average job, but this is how I do this extraordinarily, ordinary stuff extraordinarily through Christ. Yeah, love it. If somebody, you talked about this a little bit, but if somebody's wanting to on-ramp with your ministry somehow, how do they get involved? There's some of them have applications, some of them are just the doors open.
If any or all of those are interesting to you, the best way just to know what's going on is to go to our website, www.faithcoop.org. It looks like Faith Coop.
Okay, because I was going to say, is there a dash?
There's no dash.
Okay.
And you can kind of play around and see what makes sense. Our faith-driven community is something that's been growing. We average about 15 people in each of our cohorts that will run a couple times a year. So that's been growing really quickly. The lunch and learns are just a really low-hanging fruit. If you want to come and have lunch that we'll provide you and hear a speaker, and you can come once, you can come every time. And it's a way to be encouraged and what God's doing in the world and what he's doing actually in your life too. I always tell folks that even if you go through like our deep dive intensive of Main and Market Fellows, the narratives that you hear there are so life-changing and are so, and as a believer, they can be so life-giving. But you go back into the world and your work, and all the other narratives that we kind of talked about earlier smack you in the face all day long. And so partly why we keep putting these things on and inviting people not just to be a part of one thing is the Christian life of remembering. Yes. Remembering the gospel, remembering what we're called to is so important. And so as we build out that community, I find myself having to remember. I work as the executive director of a faith and work organization, and I still want to have a sacred secular divide. I still want to fall into some of these pitfalls and these narratives, and I have to remember. And so if you're going into a work, we want to provide spaces for any of these ways to be something to remember. The other thing we have going that I forgot to mention is that we've got our blog going again, where every other week we're posting stories of local Chattanoogans and interviewing them about the work that they're doing, and where you can just go and read about someone, maybe you know them, and you've never heard them talk about it in that way, where you can be encouraged in your work. And so all of the things we do are about galvanizing Christians in the area to be encouraged in what they're doing, to know other believers especially from different denominations or races or professions that you maybe would have known for no other reason, that you can now be in community with and have a sense of who they are, so that we can together collectively in the work that we do be the hands and feet of Christ, to be that sweet aroma of the gospel. That the gospel and the Christian life isn't just about what we're against, but what we're for, that we're for flourishing in our work. We're for companies growing. We're for cities having new things happen in those places, for businesses forming, for jobs happening, for other people being influenced by the things that we do, that Christians care about those things. Jeremiah 29:7, a big verse for us, that even in exile, God's calling the Israelites to do these really mundane things of having families and gardens and that back to what he was asking them to do in Genesis chapter 2. That he's in the midst of even being in exile in a land that is not their own. Sound familiar? That they're called to do these things for their sake of their own flourishing, but then he goes one step farther. That is actually for the flourishing of the place that I have you, which is Babylon in that situation. Right. So that Christians can have a vision for what it means to collectively do that together. And that's our heart. That's why we do what we're doing. We want to see that happen in our city. Right. Fantastic. So can you give me, first of all, I do just want to say, amazing work. I mean, this is, and I wanted to just say for my friend here, Jonathan Ingram, that he is very generous with giving this stuff away. I hope you don't mind me doing this, but if you're listening and you've got ideas, he'll at least hear you out on ways that he can partner with you, or whether you're a business or a church kind of a thing. He or another nonprofit. He is very quick, obviously, because you built this whole extensive network to share, find ways to partner. He's just one of the team players in town, which I always find really exciting because it helps build unity. So give me, if you can, just maybe one or two stories that help just land this plane for people. We've talked ideas, but give me, and you don't have to share names, but and I love doing this because this is the reality, right? We've been talking big ideas, and I love being in the clouds, but discipleship is really, it's like, how do we take these ideas and these principles that we live off of, that we think are so important in this captivating story that God created us in his image, that he came, even in our sin, came and redeemed us, and not just my soul, but he's redeeming all of creation back to himself. Like, that's a big, beautiful story, but I still have to wake up on Monday and go to my cubicle. All right. Like, so what is it? How do we do this? So just one, I mean, I can tell a lot of stories. I'll give you one quick example. Our Main and Market Fellows class is a great chance for people from different professions to meet one another. So in 1 year, we had a man who works for a large health insurance company in town that was a part of the program, and another guy that worked for a corporate business insurance company in town. And they struck up a friendship. And one of the men had a son who is an adult with special needs, and they were just lamenting to each other that he was having a hard time finding a local physician that was trained to care for an adult with special needs. It's kind of a new thing as the science has gotten better. The other guy who was listening to this story had been a family doctor before, working at a health insurance company, and felt the tension in his own heart with how he felt in that moment, where he realized that was an issue that needed to be addressed. They began praying together and thinking about what could be done to kind of meet that need. And oftentimes we think, okay, when we think about big needs like that, we have to go outside of the spheres of professional influence that we have. But they were going through this Main and Market class where God cares about our work, that he uses the work and labors of our hands for the sake of the kingdom, that we all have what Kuyper would call spheres of influence that we're called to live into, that we have a chance to influence that area in light of what we believe in the gospel. And so they began to work in the spheres of influence they had in their professions. And the one man who was working in health insurance began working with the training part of that department. They began making connections with other people in town. And over the course of a 2-year window, they were able to build out a program for doctors in the state of Tennessee to be virtually trained on what it meant to care for adults with special needs. It went so well the first year, 200 doctors were trained, that Vanderbilt picked it up and is funding it for 10 years and gave them a physical space to do that. Amazing. These are two men who did not have to leave the confines of the work God had called them to do, in community, as hearing a brokenness in their own lives that they knew translated to a broader audience, who were able to think about what would it look like for renewal to show up and how we can do that in the work we're already doing. And I would say Main and Market only had a small part of that, but what I would call Main and Market and what we do is we help recalibrate people's compasses. Yeah. Where they're postured in a way to see in a new way ways that God can use them in the world. And that's just one, and it's a big example. There's other examples of someone who was on a team of 3, and they went through the class and they realized, we don't have really a lot of trust in our team. And instead of just saying we need to talk about trust, they said, how can we rethink our 3-person staff meeting every week that's going to build trust over the course of time? That their movement, their posture changed to think about, how do I care for these employees over the long haul that's going to lead to long-standing trust. Right. Like these little things that we feel like are inconsequential, we want to help people say, no, these are like holy moments that the Lord can meet you at.
Yeah. And this is, it's discipleship. And, I hope I don't get misconstrued here or misunderstood. Again, I am, I fill a pulpit, weekly as well. But this is like answers to prayers for me. Like I get up and I preach from the Word, and I of course believe in its effectiveness, and I don't have doubts in my mind as far as that's concerned. But I also am very aware of this is a small. It's a big part, but it's also not the whole part. It's a small portion of the whole of the kingdom of God, and this being actualized in people's lives, because anybody who does the kind of stuff that you're talking about here, when they come to church, they'll get more out of the sermons because they're living it all of a sudden. I know more than the elders because I keep your precepts, because I'm doing it. It's instructing me, and it'll give you a hunger for that preached word, because there's, those are stories as well, right? Yeah, so many of the gospel stories. I mean, yes, there's, the just straight up teaching that's in Scripture, but most of the Scripture is stories that people will have to apply to their lives.
And it also, what's the last thing that you do on a Sunday morning before you dismiss people? What's the last thing that you do?
Well, I give a benediction.
You give a benediction.
Yes.
And what is a benediction?
I go now in peace to love and serve the Lord.
It's a sending out.
Yeah.
It's a sending out, not to stop being the church. It's a sending out of the church now scattered. So we talk a lot about on Sundays we come together as the church gathered. But we don't stop being the church when you do the benediction. Now you're sending out a church scattered into the world where, as Jamie Smith would say, on Sunday you've been restoried to live into a story all week long, where we need to come back together to be
Absolutely,
restored. Yeah. But that you don't stop being the church when you go out. And if you have a vision for that, you haven't checked your business life at the door when you walk into the sanctuary. You've actually said, no, I need to bring this and have this. I need this story to be redeemed as well. And I'm not having to pick it back up. It's already with me. And I go with new purpose into whatever I'm called to do, whether it's what I want to be doing or something I feel stuck in.
Right.
I have a guy on my board who works for a company in town that helps people with accounting. And when we created our 501c3, our budget was a mess. I can talk all day to people and relationally keep things in mind, but numbers and me don't get along. And our budget looked, I just couldn't it didn't make any sense to me. And so he stepped in and said, I'd love to help you with that. And so what he did was he spent probably 8 hours with Excel spreadsheets and took our numbers and made them make sense so that someone even like me could understand them and I could share it with others. And I told him, I said, I feel very loved by you right now, by you staring at an Excel spreadsheet. And he said, Jonathan, God has gifted me to look at numbers and make sense of them, to take something that looks chaotic and make order out of it. And I'm going to use that gift to love others. And I use that example because even work that we sometimes think is silly or I have to, I'm doing Excel spreadsheets.
How can God care about numbers?
Yeah, how can God care about that fact that I'm at a cubicle staring at a screen?
Right.
That's actually a way that he is imaging the Father.
Right.
Is when he takes chaos and makes order in those numbers, he is the sweet aroma of Christ in that moment. And I felt loved.
Right.
Because he was doing his work with excellence. Tim Keller calls that the ministry of competency. That our first line of ministry in a business or in a company or in anything that we do isn't the words we say or the service. It's doing it with excellence for the sake of others. And that's a new meaning to when you leave a church on Sunday, right? It's saying, hey, I'm going out and I haven't stopped my spiritual life. The Father goes before me. He goes with me. That whole idea of like that we are his temple isn't just so we don't smoke cigarettes, but it's actually that the Father lives within us.
Right.
That the Spirit of God he dwells with us. And so wherever we go, we're with the Father, and that he is honored by our good work and that he sees it. Yeah.
And there's, so much of just, I love it's boots on the ground and people having a more fully orbed faith, I guess would be the best way I've got. So those are great stories. Tell me about what are some of the big challenges that, whether it's maybe it's figuring out how to work with numbers, maybe something like that. But just this is the kind of cultural thing that I'm pushing back against in Chattanooga. You've spoken to that a little bit. But what are some of the big? Speak to that. What are the big challenges of this organization in either one of those two directions?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to. I can talk really practically, but I'll start kind of big picture first. Is one of the things that we've just been talking about really is when we disciple this way, the gospel becomes bigger. More of our life are things that God cares about. Mm-hmm. And what we're always constantly trying to figure out is where are the lines of our organization? What are we called to do? What are we not called to do? And that's why I love partnering, is because I am feeling our limitations. I've just mentioned 5 or 6 things that we do. Yeah. And feeling where we can draw the line. And really, the other part that's a big picture is telling our story. Like, these ideas that we're sitting and talking about are foreign to some people, to be quite honest with you, where what we do is interpreted in lots of different ways. And so we want to tell our story really clearly. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. So that way, and then, a little bit more practically is, you mentioned the fact that when you think about the faith and work movement, you oftentimes think about executives or white collar work. And honestly, it's not just white collar work. It's predominantly a white ministry, and we would fall in that category still. But what we really believe is if God cares about all of our work while we're doing this podcast, then that should be representative in what discipleship of our organization looks like. And so we're wrestling with how to do that well, where some of the modes or the forms of pedagogy or programming that we do might not be a good fit for different types of industries or types of work. And so we want to continue to be creative with what it means to disciple folks in the spaces God has them. I do think people who are working with their hands and feet every day, tangibly, this idea, and if they're people of faith, the idea of that God cares about your work is a lot easier to get your mind around because they're viscerally experiencing it every day. And so part of what I think is, how do we build out more chances to encourage and to highlight and to celebrate folks that are in that work, where they can see that the work they're doing matters to God and that others are acknowledging it and it's a gift to them. And so that's one of the things we're working on. I could talk a lot about all the things that we're trying to do. I
love that you're being bold and chasing after stuff that's just not easy. For nonprofits, we can easily go after, well, this is the thing that ends up bringing in donors, kind of a thing, just like, companies might pursue, selling products. But, we're not in this because we're doing the thing that is most popular. We're in this because we're trying to make a difference in spheres where it hasn't been explored yet. So I just say kudos to you for continuing to explore that. Just while I've got this thought in my head too, sometimes I've met pastors who have gotten, maybe threatened by the kind of work that you might be doing. Like, well, they would say, well, this is the work of the church, kind of a thing. Or there's sometimes even I feel threatened because this was the stuff that I feel like I should have under my, roof, so to speak, as opposed to this thing happening outside. But I can tell you a million reasons why I think that's shifted a little bit in culture, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I want to say, rather than nonprofits having to seek out pastors seek out nonprofits. Like, you want somebody to help disciple your people. This is a tool in town that helps people. There's not a church here for them to go to. They're still part of your church. You're even building temporary communities for the most part. I mean, there's some where they can hobnob, kind of a thing, with other business leaders, kind of a thing. But some of these intensive trainings are temporary communities. But this will bring your people back healthier, stronger, happier. Again, they will hear more out of your sermons. And it's a gift to just have a ministry like this in town. So I almost want to just sort of reverse that, because I know, nonprofits often just go chasing after, churches for more people, but really churches, we should be functioning in somewhat the opposite way. Are there a few good key nonprofits that help augment the ministries you're doing?
I mean, that's our prayer. We want to support and resource churches in town that have limited time, where you're thinking through, man, we should really do a series on this, or we should really think about this. And we want to come in and be a support to you. We're not trying to create a church. No, thank you. But again, I mean, we did our Faith and Work 101 class recently in a Presbyterian church, and the teachers of the Sunday school class were an Anglican, a Southern Baptist, and a Methodist. We're teaching Sunday school at a PCA church. And man, that just felt like the kingdom of God. And we weren't trying to change anybody's base theology. We're saying, hey, let's talk about that God cares about your actual life. He cares about Monday to Friday. And what are the implications for that? And so what we're trying to do is we want to be extremely ecumenical. We want this to be a galvanizing thing for Christians all over town, and hope it can be that. And we want to be a gift to churches, support them what they're doing. We want to support pastors. I was meeting with a pastor recently who's saying, I don't know what this would look like for my Sunday morning to think about work on a Sunday morning. So I got a couple ideas I could help you think about, and you don't have to use any of them if you don't want, but I want to help you imagine what it might look like to disciple your congregant with thinking about them as a worker, not fully as a worker. That's not the only thing they are, but it's a huge 40 to 60 hours a week of someone's life. They are at a job. I hope God cares about it. And I hope pastors in our city have a heart and know how to actually disciple people and pastor people towards that. I think oftentimes it's easy to ask them about their marriage and their quiet time and their walk with the Lord personally. But if you're a pastor, especially if you went to seminary and then you jumped right into the church, you've never worked a 9-to-5. That might be a really awkward or hard thing to talk about. And so one of the things we want to do is support pastors to know how to view their congregants in that way.
Right. And I've done the majority of my working life not in a church, and it's not 9 to 5. There's some ways in which it's 24/7, and
that's right.
But you have different. There's just, it's not one is better than the other, or one's you're working harder than the other. It's just it's just a different
framework. Yeah,
it's a different framework, and it's helpful to have a resource like you guys in town. So, all right. So obviously, we care about prayer here. Is there if you can put it into 1 to 3 requests? How, if people are listening, and I will just say, listen, and don't just listen to these requests, but actually, like, even after this ends, give a quick, minute or two to prayer about this. But how would you, what would you say these are our prayer requests? These are what we're praying for.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the things I'm really thankful about for this organization is your emphasis on that. So our theme for the 2024-2025 year is seeking wisdom for our whole organization. And we've thought about, well, what does that mean? What are we actually calling people to? And the first thing we say is we're calling people, if you're seeking wisdom, to a life of humility. It's a life of realizing you actually have to be the life of prayer, that you don't know everything, that we need a Father to guide us and lead us and discern what we're supposed to do in any situation, in our vocation or wherever. The second thing that we're called to do is actually to do that in community. That that we don't do this alone, but that wisdom is actually found with others. And the third is that wisdom isn't just a philosophy or an ideology. Wisdom is a person. It's found in Christ. And so if you're going to go through our organization, this is important to us. And so wisdom's a big one. So for us, I think a big prayer request is that the Lord would soften the hearts of workers around town, that this can be a way to invite people to see the gospel in new ways. One of my favorite things is when someone comes to an event and hears about a professional in town that they know about professionally, talk about how their faith informs their work, that they will say this, and I've had people come up to me and say this after an event. I've never heard no Christian talk that way before. That sounds like grace. That what we do, even though most of what we do is for Christians, that those that are watching in would get a glimpse of what it looks like to follow Jesus in a holistic way. That he isn't just here to condemn when you mess up, but he's here renewing all things to himself, and that Christians have an eye to see that. And that's a gospel that people can get behind. And I'm excited that we can keep doing that, and just prayers for the hearts. But we can't do that on our own. It's the Holy Spirit. We're still doing the work. Right. And we need him to go before us in that work. The second is just wisdom on, like I asked earlier about, is prayer on making sure we're walking down the right path God's calling us to, that we're not getting ahead of what he wants us to do, that we're staying in what he's calling us to do, and discerning what that is. And
maybe even the patience to endure until he's got you ready to move to the next thing. Because you're a visionary leader, so it's hard. I got 100 ideas. And so patience and trusting the Lord is so, it's going to be key for me personally, but us for an organization as well. And that God would continue to bring the right people. The Chattanooga Fellows Program, we do recruit for that every single year, and we're just praying that God would bring the right young people. The Main and Market Fellows it's a big commitment for people to sign up for 2 hours every Monday night for 9 months. That's a huge commitment. And that's probably a hard sell for busy people.
It's
the word of mouth people that probably.
That's right. And so just that the Lord would continue to bring the right people for those programs that they're ready to receive and that are able and that we're meeting them in the right time. And it's just been neat to see how the Lord continues to be faithful. But I got to keep looking backwards, because every year we're like, oh no, how are we going to fill this class again? And he continues to show up for us. And so just prayers for his continuous faithfulness in the work we're doing.
Okay. And some of this can be overlap where you repeat yourself a bit, but a question I just want to keep asking our nonprofit leaders, because there's, when I think of, what drives me to get up every morning, it's not necessarily like you can't compact it just in our vision statement of our organization, but I'm like, well, yeah, but this is what's driving me, is because I have this vision for what I want to see happen in this city. What is that vision that you would say this is what's getting me up? This is the bee in my bonnet that I'm going to relentlessly chase after, that I wake up with, most days kind of a thing, that just I'm going after this. What would that be? What's your vision for and hope for the city?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
If you can distill that down even.
Yeah, I will try. Yep. For me, one of the things that I really care a lot about is, what does it mean for the church to be the light of Christ in a place? And the more I think about and the more I talk with leaders, I realize how much of our life is formed and shaped by the work that we do. the relationships that we have. A lot of people are at a job where they're spending more time with their coworkers than they are with their spouse or their kids. This is a massive part of their life. And how do we help people have eyes to see that the work that they're doing is something God cares about, that's a way that they can honor the Lord, and that it's actually something that's eternal? Yeah. That God's redeeming not just their soul, but all of who they are, even the work of their hands, to himself. I love the picture in the Bible where it starts in the beginning of the Bible. We start in a garden, this big, beautiful garden with a river flowing through it. Adam and Eve are there, and they're called to cultivate it. And sin messes everything up. But at the end of the story, when we get to redemption and Revelation, we see not us returning to a garden, but we see us returning to a celestial city that also has the river running through it. Well, what's a city? It's human culture. It's humans taking God's good creation and making something of it, as he designed us to do from the beginning, Abad and Shamar, to work and to keep the land, to build things, to make things of God's good creation. So the things that we're doing every day, this is a big, beautiful picture. So if people can get this vision, and this vision that what they're doing matters to God, what would it look like for Christians all over the city to have that vision, work together for that case, and how do we tell a better story of what the gospel is to a world that needs to hear it? A world that needs to know that God cares about it, that we are not forgotten, that all things are not lost. Mm-hmm. How do we live with that hope? And what would it look like for Christians from different denominations to have something that unites them together to move forward for the sake of the kingdom that we hope for and long for? Steve Garber says, how do we create signposts of the kingdom to come when we do good, when God allows us to do good works? And we're not saying good works is a way for salvation. We're saying in light of the salvation we have, that because of God's grace, we're now able, because of the Spirit living within us, to at some level, even not perfectly, live into the kingdom that he's calling us to.
Yeah.
What a gift. And my prayer is that we can be a small picture of that here in Chattanooga for the sake of others and for the sake of the city that tells a story that invites others into it.
To do your part.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
Beautiful picture. Well, Jonathan, thank you for being on today.
It was an honor. Thank you for asking me.
We could just keep talking about this, but we'll keep it to an hour, and hopefully we'll have you come back and you can talk more, and I'd even love sometime to dive into more of the theology. So I'm looking forward to your podcast coming out too. Yeah. And explaining some of these in real life for people.
Look for Weekday Saints. It'll be myself and LaQuisha Ewing co-hosting that. So I'm really excited about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And thank you everyone for listening.